The Aurelian Diadem did not build monuments to its cruelties. It filed them. On the 14th day of the Assembly's high session, in the vault hall beneath the world called Coronal Prime, a clerk of the registry rose and read the 14 clauses of Statute 9 Kestrel into the amber recorder. The statute had a plain name in the ledger and a plainer one in the corridors. In the ledger it was the redistribution of protective obligation. In the corridors, where the great families laughed behind their sleeves, they called it the abandoned human act. The clerk read it in a voice with no weather in it. Clause by clause, the statute did a small and enormous thing. It did not declare war on humanity. It did not order a single ship to fire. It simply erased them from the column of the protected. Where the Diadem's charter had once bound every member species under the shield of the conquered fleet, the statute drew a thin line through the word human and wrote beside it, in the registry's cold shorthand, self-sustaining. That was all. Humans would henceforth be regarded as self-sustaining. The fleet owed them nothing. The courts owed them nothing. The relief granaries, the medical writs, the evacuation priorities, the treaty guarantees that had stood for 2 centuries, all of it, with a single ratified word, dissolved. The vote was not close. The Assembly ratified Statute 9 Kestrel by a margin of 11 parts in 12, and the great families laughed, and the amber recorder swallowed the law, and the session moved on to a dispute about mineral tithes before the hour was out. The architect of the statute did not speak during the vote. He rarely spoke. Prefect Cael Marrow of the Hollow Ministry sat in the 3rd tier with his long hands folded, and his pale face composed into the expression he wore for all occasions, which was the expression of a man doing sums no one else could see. Marrow was Aurelian in the old sense, tall and gray-skinned and elegant, the last true blood of a house that had run the empire's supply arteries since before the conquered. He had drafted the act himself, over the course of a year, in a room no one visited, and he had done it for reasons that were both simpler and more elaborate than anyone in the assembly guessed. The public reason was thrift. The empire was overextended. The border wars against the shoal collectives had bled the treasury white, and the human colonies along the spur, 41 worlds, most of them poor, all of them stubborn, cost the fleet more to garrison and supply than they returned in tithe. The numbers, when Marrow presented them, were unanswerable. Humans, the prefect's report explained, were a drain. They were also, conveniently, unloved. The old species resented them for their speed and their appetite, and the way they had come out of nowhere 3 centuries ago and made themselves indispensable to 100 worlds. Cutting them loose would balance the ledgers and please the families in a single stroke. Self-sustaining, the report concluded. They will manage. They always manage. That was the public reason, and it was a lie built around a true number, which is the most durable kind of lie. The private reason lived in the same room where the act was drafted, in a sealed accounting no one but Marrow had read. For 11 years the Hollow Ministry had been quietly failing at the one thing it existed to do. The ministry oversaw the Lattice, the vast, ancient, half-understood web of jump relays that let the Empire's ships fold from star to star without dying in the dark between. The Lattice was older than the Diadem. No one had built it in living memory. It had been inherited, patched, and worshipped, and for 2 centuries the humans had tended it. No one had planned that. It had simply happened, the way water finds the low channel. When humans arrived on the galactic stage, they had been curious about the relays in a way the old species were not. The Aurelians and the Shoal and the stately Vemonth regarded the Lattice as a utility, a thing that worked and was not to be questioned. Humans regarded it as a puzzle they had not yet solved, which to a human is the most exciting thing in the universe. They crawled inside the relays. They learned the machine song of them. They wrote the maintenance liturgies and then, quietly, rewrote them better. Within a century, the entire operational tending of the Lattice, the balancing, the phase work, the 1,000 daily adjustments that kept 10,000 relays humming in tune, had passed into human hands, not by decree, by competence. Because when a relay faltered over the Vemonth homeworld, it was a human crew that answered, and the Vemonth, relieved, did not ask too many questions about who was climbing into their sky. Prefect Ondamir knew this. It was, in fact, the whole of his private accounting. For 11 years he had been diverting the ministry's Lattice budget, the funds that were supposed to train new tenders, to build the redundancy, to keep the great machine understood, into ventures that filled the Ondamir coffers and the campaign chests of the families he needed. He had gambled that the Lattice, being ancient and reliable, would keep working while he bled it. And it had. It kept working because the humans kept it working, on a fraction of the funding, out of a stubborn professional pride the Prefect neither shared nor comprehended. But the humans had begun to notice the funding cuts. They had begun to file petitions, dry, technical, alarming petitions, warning that the Lattice was aging faster than it was being maintained, that the redundancy was gone, that a cascade was no longer impossible. Ondamir had read the petitions. Each one was a lit match held near the ledger that would end him. If an inquiry ever traced the Lattice's decay to the missing budget, the trail led to one room, one house, one gray and elegant man. So he did not repair the Lattice, he removed the witnesses. He wrote a statute that severed the Empire from the humans entirely, that cut them out of the charter, out of the payrolls, out of the very obligation to notice them, and dressed it in the language of thrift. Once humans were self-sustaining, they were no longer imperial employees. The ministry's records of what it had paid them and failed to pay them would be sealed as obsolete. The petitions would be void. And the humans, unloved and unprotected, would drift off into their poor colonies and be forgotten, and the great machine would keep humming, because Ondamir believed, truly believed, with the serene confidence of a man who has never touched the thing he owns, that the Lattice ran itself. He was wrong about exactly one thing, and it was the only thing that mattered. 900 light-years down the spur, on a relay station called Harrow's Eye, a young man named Cael Marrow learned that his species had been abandoned while he was 300 meters inside a machine. Cael was 20 years old and had been a licensed tender for 8 months, which made him the second youngest full tender on the Eye and the proudest. He was long and raw-boned in the way of spur-born humans. With pale eyes and dark hair he kept shaved close so it wouldn't catch in the equipment, and burned scars on both forearms from the day he'd learned, permanently, why you check the phase shunt twice. He had grown up on Harrow's Eye. His mother had tended Relay Cluster 9 before him, and her hands were in the machine still, in the worn places where a specific grip had polished the metal over 30 years, and Cael put his hands in those same places without thinking, the way you touch a doorframe in the house where you were a child. He was inside the Cluster 9 core when the news came, balanced on a strut in the humming dark with a phase probe in his teeth and his arms deep in the relay's throat, coaxing a drift error back into tune. The Lattice spoke to him through the soles of his boots and the bones of his jaw, a vast, layered chord, 10,000 relays singing across the galaxy, and his own small relay a single note within it, a note he was responsible for, a note that had to be true or ships would die. He was good at his work. He was better than good. He had the thing his mother called the ear, the ability to feel a relay going sour a full day before the instruments caught it, and he had just found the sour note in Cluster 9, and was 3 careful adjustments into fixing it when his crew lead's voice came down the line, flat and strange. "Cael, come up." "I'm in the throat," he said around the probe. "Give me 20. "Come up now." He came up. It took him 9 minutes to back out of the core. You did not rush inside a relay. Not ever. Not for anything. And when his head cleared the access hatch into the ready room, he found the entire day crew of Harrow's Eye standing in silence around the comms table, and he knew before anyone spoke that something had broken that could not be tuned. His crew lead was a woman named Dammer, 40 years on the Lattice, hands like carved root. She was looking at the amber crawl of an imperial dispatch on the comms table, and her face had gone somewhere very far away. When Cael came in, she looked up at him, at him specifically, the youngest one there but for the apprentice girl, and something in her expression made his stomach drop. "Read it," she said. He read it, Statute 9 Kestrel. Redistribution of protective obligation. The words meant nothing and then, as he parsed them, meant everything. Self-sustaining. He read it twice. He read the clause that voided the ministry's obligations to human personnel. He read the clause that sealed the maintenance petitions as obsolete records of a severed relationship. He read the clause, buried, clerical, deadly, that terminated the Lattice tending contracts, effective immediately without severance, because there was no longer any legal party to sever from. "They fired us," Cael said. His voice came out wrong. "All of us, every tender on the Lattice." "They didn't fire us," Oza said. "You can't fire a self-sustaining population. There's no us to fire, there's no contract. There never was as of this morning. We've been unmade." She said it without heat, which was worse than heat. 200 years, and they unmade us with a word to save a line in a ledger. The apprentice girl, who was 16 and had come out from a mining world only that spring, started to cry very quietly, not from fear yet but from the pure vertigo of it, the ground going out from under a life. An older tender put an arm around her. Someone swore softly, in the long looping profanity of the spur. And Cael stood there with the machine song still in his jaw and his mother's grip still warm in his palms. And he did the thing that would, though he did not know it yet, begin the reckoning. He asked the question no one in the Aurelian Diadem had thought to ask. "So who's tending the Lattice tomorrow?" The ready room went quiet in a new way. Because that was the thing the Empire had forgotten, in its vault hall 900 light-years away, laughing behind its sleeves. It had not fired an underclass. It had not cut loose a colony of the poor and the unloved. It had, with a single ratified word, dismissed the entire operational staff of the machine that held the galaxy together. The 10,000 relays, the 10,000 true notes, the vast singing web that let 100 worlds touch each other across the killing dark. It had told the only people who understood the Lattice that the Lattice was no longer their concern. And the Lattice was dying. It had been dying for 11 years, starved by a gray man's ledger, held together past all reason by the stubborn pride of people who were paid too little and thanked never. It had been dying slowly, kept alive one drift error at a time by hands like Cael Marrow's and throats like cluster 9s, all across the spur and the core and the deep between. Osidammer looked at the youngest true tender on Harrow's eye, and something moved behind her exhausted eyes. Not quite hope, not yet, but the first cold clarity of a person who has just been handed, unwillingly, a great and terrible lever. "That," she said slowly, "is a very good question." 900 light-years away, Prefect Sarl Ondamir went home to his estate on Coronal Prime, poured a measure of pale Vemonth wine, and slept the untroubled sleep of a man who had balanced his books at last. Below his windows the Lattice hummed on as it always had, as he was certain it always would. He had 4 days. The word went out along the spur faster than any dispatch, because humans did not need the Empire's channels to talk to each other. They used the Lattice itself. This was the second thing the Diadem had forgotten, if it had ever known it. The relays did not only fold ships. In the long, quiet hours of tending, generations of humans had learned to lay their own thin whisper of signal in the machine's carrier song, a private frequency riding under the imperial traffic, undetectable to anyone who did not know the machine from the inside. The tenders called it the underhum. It had no official existence. On it, the tenders of 10,000 relays gossiped and grieved and warned each other of coming drift, a community of hands scattered across the galaxy but joined through the very thing they served. It was, though none of them had ever thought of it that way, a nervous system. And on the day Statute 9 Kestrel was read into the amber recorder, the nervous system lit up from the core to the far spur with a single question, passed relay to relay in the tender's clipped code. Did you get the notice? Are you still working? The answers came back through the night, and they were not what the Empire would have predicted, because the Empire understood humans the way a man understands a river he has only ever crossed on a bridge. On Harrow's Eye, Osai Dammer gathered the day crew and the night crew both into the ready room and did not tell them what to do because that was not how the Lattice worked and never had been. She laid the thing out plain. As of this morning we don't exist, she said. No pay, no protection. If a relay blows and takes a crew, there's no writ, no inquiry, no widow's stipend. There's nothing because there's no one to be sorry to. They've made us ghosts and left the machine in the ghost's hands. So, she looked around the room at 40 tired faces, at the crying apprentice and the swearing old-timers and the young man Cael Marrow standing very still by the hatch. The question in front of us isn't whether they've wronged us. They have. The question is what a person does with a machine that 100 worlds are standing on, when the fools who owned it have just handed it to her and walked away. Nobody answered right off. Then a tender named Bako, who had lost 2 fingers to relay cluster 4 and never once been late to a shift, said the thing they were all circling. We could stop. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a man naming a fact that had appeared in the room. We could just stop. Down tools, every hand on the lattice all at once. And in about, he tilted his head, doing the arithmetic every tender carried in the back of the skull, 3-4 days the drift catches up and the cascade starts and the whole thing comes apart. Every relay, every jump lane. The Empire falls into 10,000 pieces that can't touch each other. No fleet, no trade, no supply. They'd be back to sublight in a week, screaming across a dark they forgot how to cross. He spread his ruined hands. We could do that. They've given us the leverage. They've given us the whole galaxy by the throat and told us we don't owe them a thing. The silence after that was enormous. And here is what the Empire would never have understood, could not have understood, because it had spent 3 centuries mistaking human competence for human servility. Not one person in that room wanted to do it. Not out of love for the Empire. They had no love for the Empire. Not out of fear, either. They were past fear, in the strange calm that comes after the ground gives way. It was something harder to name and harder to break. It was that they knew what was standing on the Lattice. They knew the Vemonth broodships that carried 1,000,000 larvae between the Kresh worlds that would drift dead in the black if the lanes closed. They knew the shoal medical convoys, the grain haulers feeding the tithe-starved inner colonies, the pilgrim fleets, the ordinary daily traffic of 100 species who had never voted for Statute 9 Kestrel and had never laughed behind any sleeve. The tenders had spent their lives keeping strangers alive across the dark. It was not a job to them. It had become, over 2 centuries and without anyone deciding it, a kind of faith. And you do not let a Vemonth broodship die to punish a prefect you have never met. We're not doing that, Cael said. It came out of him before he decided to speak and heads turned. He flushed but held on. Bako's right that we could. But the Vemonth overcast reticulum. There's a broodship inbound. I saw it on the traffic feed this morning, 500,000 larvae. They're relying on lane 9 folding clean in about 30 hours. If we down tools, they don't make the fold, they scatter into the deep, they die. They didn't do this to us. The Assembly did this to us, so we don't kill the Vemonth to get at the Assembly. He swallowed. That's not who we are. No, Osa agreed quietly. It isn't. She looked at Bako, who nodded slowly because he'd known it too. He'd only needed to say the terrible thing aloud so the room could refuse it together. So the cudgel's off the table. Good. Now we think like tenders instead of like victims. She put both root-hard hands flat on the comms table. We don't own the leverage by threatening to break the machine. Any thug can break a machine. We own the leverage because we understand it and they don't. So the question is, what does understanding let us do that force never could? It was Cael again who found the shape of it. He would think about that later, that he had been 20 years old and 8 months licensed, and it had been him, standing by the hatch with burned scars on his arms, and he would never be quite sure whether he'd been brave or simply too young to know the size of what he was proposing. "We tell the truth," he said. "Go on," said Osei. "They think the lattice runs itself. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's why they could cut us loose, because in their heads we were a cost, not a cause. They don't know it's dying. They don't know it's been dying for years. We've been holding it together and filing petitions nobody read." His mind was racing now, the same racing that happened inside a relay when he could feel the true note just past his reach. "So we don't threaten to stop. We show them what stopping means, but only where it can't kill anyone. We let one relay go, a dead one. A relay on a lane with no traffic, out on the edge where nobody lives, one we can sacrifice clean. We stop tending it, and we let the Empire watch it cascade, and we make very sure they understand that this is the small version. This is one relay. There are 10,000. And the only reason the other 9,999 are still singing is a workforce they abolished this morning to save a line in a ledger." Osei Dammer looked at him for a long moment. "You want to give them a demonstration," she said. "I want to give them the truth," Cael said. "The demonstration's just so they can't file it under obsolete." They chose Relay 16 Ashfall. It was a good choice, and choosing it well was the first proof that the tenders meant to be surgeons and not butchers. 16 Ashfall sat at the dead end of the Saran Reach, a spur of a spur, folding a single lane that led to a burnt-out system with nothing in it but a survey buoy and the wreck of a mining venture that had failed 40 years ago. No colonies depended on it. No brood ships, no grain haulers, no pilgrims. Rerouting the trickle of traffic that used it added 6 hours to a journey almost no one made. If any relay in the whole Lattice could be allowed to die without a single life going out with it, it was 16 Ashfall. And it was already dying. That was the terrible poetry of it, and Cael felt the weight of it when Osei showed him the tending logs. 16 Ashfall had been on the edge for 3 years, running on a phase shunt 2 generations out of spec, because the replacement had been in the budget that never came. Its tender, an old man named Voss who worked the Saran Reach alone, had been nursing it by hand, coming out to it every 11 days to coax the drift back down, filing petition after petition begging for the part that would fix it. The petitions were in the sealed file now, marked obsolete. Voss had kept the relay alive for 3 years past its death on nothing but his own hands and his own stubbornness, exactly as the whole Lattice had been kept alive. And now, the tenders were going to let his relay be the one that showed the Empire the truth of what it had done. They asked him first. That mattered to them. Osei raised old Voss on the underhum and laid it out, and there was a long silence across 900 light-years, and then the old man's voice came back, dry and slow. "She's been trying to die for 3 years, he said. "They wouldn't send me the part. Let her die where the whole galaxy can see it then. Let her be worth something." A pause. "But you route the traffic clear first. Every ship. I don't care if it's a garbage scow. Not one life on my relay. You hear me, Dammer?" "Not one life," Osei said. "I swear it." They rerouted the traffic. It took 2 days to do it right, to walk the trickle of ships off the Saran Reach lane and onto the long way around, ship by ship, with the tenders of a dozen relays quietly adjusting folds to absorb the diverted traffic, without a soul aboard any vessel ever knowing that a decision had been made about their lives 900 light-years away. When the last ship was clear, when the Saran Reach lane held nothing but the survey buoy and the 40-year wreck and the survey buoy's automated ghost, Osei Dammer sent the word up the underhum, and old Voss on his lonely station put his hand on the phase shunt of the relay he had kept alive for 3 years past its time, and he did not adjust the drift. He simply took his hand away. And Relay 16 Ashfall, released at last, began to die. It did not die quickly. That was the point of it, the thing Cael had understood from inside the machine that no one in the assembly could have understood from outside. A relay does not explode. A relay drifts. The true note it holds, The note that keeps a fold clean and a lane open wanders off pitch by imperceptible degrees, and the wandering feeds itself, the sourness compounding, the chord bending further and further from true until the fold geometry it maintains loses coherence and the lane simply closes, folds into nothing, becomes as impassable as any other stretch of the killing dark. And because the relays sang together, because they held each other in tune, a dying relay dragged at its neighbors, pulling them a little off pitch, forcing their tenders to work a little harder to stay true. That was the cascade. One relay untended was a nuisance. Its neighbors, straining to compensate, aged faster, and if they too were untended, they began to drift, and their neighbors strained, and so on outward, a slow-spreading dissonance that could, if nothing stopped it, roll across an entire region of the lattice and close 100 lanes in a week. The tenders held the ring. That was the exquisite discipline of the thing. Around 60 nashfall on every neighboring relay, human hands went into the machine and held the line, absorbing the drag of the dying relay, keeping the cascade from spreading past the one sacrificial node. They let 60 nashfall die, and they let the Empire watch it die, and they made damned sure it died alone. And on Coronal Prime in the Hollow Ministry, an alarm that had not sounded in 60 years began, very softly, to ring. The alarm rang in the Hollow Ministry for a full day before anyone of consequence heard it, and in that day the news traveled the length of the galaxy on a frequency the Empire did not know existed. The underhum, in the days after Statute 9 Kestrel, became something it had never been. For 2 centuries it had been a low, companionable murmur, tenders trading drift reports and jokes, and the small news of scattered lives, a thread of human voices woven under the machine's great cord. Now it woke up. From the core relays that folded the light of the capital to the far spur stations where a single tender might work 100 lanes alone, the same clipped question passed hand to hand and hour to hour. Are you still working? What are you going to do? And the answers came back, and out of the answers, over that first strange day, a decision assembled itself without any one person making it, the way a true note assembles itself out of 10,000 relays. On a core station called Meridian Gate, the largest tending post in the Empire, 40 relays folding the traffic of the inner worlds, a crew lead named Ismin Akoro heard the news mid-shift and did not stop working, because there was a grain hauler folding through in 11 minutes and 40,000 people on a tithe-starved colony were waiting to eat. She folded it clean. Then she gathered her crew, 300 tenders strong, and she said what Osai Dammer was saying 900 light-years away in almost the same words, because they were tenders and they thought alike whether they had ever met or not. We could break it. We won't break it, but we will not pretend nothing has happened either. And Meridian Gate joined the ring. On a lonely spur station called Kettle, a tender named Dav Alexin, 60 years on the Lattice and the last of a crew that had once been 12, heard the news and wept, not for himself but for the young ones, for the apprentice he had trained who would now inherit ghosthood along with the machine. Then he wiped his face and went back into the relay, because a pilgrim fleet was inbound and pilgrims did not care who the assembly had abolished. Kettle joined the ring. This was the thing the Empire could not have modeled, because it had no instrument for it. The Aurelian Diadem understood force, and it understood money, and it understood the intricate loyalties of the great families, and it had no way at all to measure the particular stubbornness of people who have spent their lives keeping strangers alive and cannot stop, even when the strangers spit on them, because stopping would mean becoming the thing that spat. The assembly had counted the tenders as a cost. It had never counted them as a conscience. And a conscience, distributed across 10,000 relays and joined by a frequency no imperial instrument could hear, is a very hard thing to abolish with a word. Cael Marrow spent that first day on the underhum himself, relaying between Harrow's Eye and the stations up the spur, and he heard the whole galaxy of tenders talking, and it changed him. He had thought in the ready room that he was proposing something clever, a demonstration, a truth told loudly. Listening to Dav Alexin weep and go back to work, listening to Ismin Akoro fold a grain hauler while her own life came apart, he understood that he had not invented the restraint. It was already there. It had been there for 200 years, in every tender who had ever answered a sour note over a stranger's world. He had only found the words for it. And there is a particular vertigo in a young person's discovery that the thing he thought was his idea is actually the character of his whole people, older than he is and larger, and that his job is not to invent it but to be worthy of speaking for it. "You all right?" Ose asked him, late that first night, finding him at the underhum console with his eyes red-rimmed. "They're all doing it," he said, "everywhere. Nobody told them to, everyone's holding the ring, even the ones who have got every reason to let go." He looked up at her. "I keep thinking about what happens if I'm wrong, if the truth doesn't move them, if it comes down to whether we break the machine after all, and I don't think we could. I don't think a single one of us could actually take our hands away and let a broodship die. Which means our whole leverage is a bluff, Osai. The one thing that scares them, that we could bring it all down, is the one thing we'll never do." Osai Dammer was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing he would carry for the rest of his life. "It's not a bluff, Cael. A bluff is when you're pretending. We're not pretending. We really could bring it down. We've got the machine by the throat. That's true, that's real, and they can feel it's real. The only reason we won't is that we're better than they are. That's not weakness. That's the whole of our strength. The day they figure out we'd rather die than let their children die, that's the day we've won, because there's no answer to it. You can fight an enemy who wants to destroy you. You can't fight one who's keeping you alive on purpose while you spit on them. It unmakes you from the inside. So no." She put a root-hard hand on his shoulder. "Don't you dare be ashamed of the mercy. The mercy is the weapon. It's the only one that's ever won anything worth keeping." 900 light-years away, Prefect Sarl Ondamir began, for the first time in 11 years, to sleep badly. He would not have called it fear. He was not a man who admitted to fear, even to himself, especially to himself. He called it, in the private accounting of his skull, an unresolved variable. The Saarn Reach relay had failed. That was expected. That was in fact convenient. A dead relay on a dead lane proving nothing except that old equipment ages. But the integrity alarm had propagated further than a single failure should have, and when his analysts modeled the drift, the model did not fit. The cascade around 60 Nashfall was not spreading. It should have spread. An untended relay drags its neighbors, and instead it sat, contained, held to a single node with a precision his instruments could measure but his people could not explain. Something was holding the ring. Something was making a deliberate, disciplined choice to let one relay die and no more. Ondamir was a clever man, and cleverness has a cruelty in it that is different from the ordinary kind. It cannot leave a thing unexplained, and so it arrives at the truth faster than it wants to. He looked at the contained cascade, and he understood, before he let himself understand it, that the humans were still there, that they had not drifted off into their poor colonies to be forgotten, that they were sitting on his machine with their hands inside it, and that they were, at this moment, choosing to keep it alive, and that a people who could choose to keep it alive could also, at any moment, choose otherwise. He had told the assembly the Lattice ran itself. He had told it so often and so well that he had come to half believe it, the way a liar comes to love the smoothest of his lies. Now, in the small hours, staring at a model that would not fit, he faced the thing he had built his whole scheme on not knowing, that the machine did not run itself, that it had never run itself, that it ran on the hands of the very people he had just abolished, and that he had not cut loose a cost. He had cut the cable he was hanging from and told himself it was ballast. There were, he saw, 2 roads out. The first was confession, to go to the court, to say what he had done before it was found, to throw himself on a mercy the humans had already shown they possessed. His whole nature recoiled from it. A man does not spend 11 years and an act of the assembly hiding a thing in order to walk into a room and give it away. The second road was the one his nature had walked his whole life. Double the stake, bury the truth deeper. If the humans were still there holding the machine, then the danger was not the failing Lattice. The danger was that the humans could speak. So silence them. Not with a statute this time. The statute was passed and it had not been enough. Silence them the old way, the family way, the way the diadem had silenced inconvenient truths for 200 years. Call them saboteurs. Call the contained cascade an attack. Turn the thing they had done to prove their restraint, the surgical, merciful containment of a single relay, into evidence of a terrorist's precision. And send the fleet to garrison the spur and take the Lattice into direct administration, so that when it failed at last, as it must, the failure could be blamed on the very people who had been holding it up. It was monstrous, and it was elegant, and it was, Andamir told himself in the untroubled voice he used for all his sums, simply the arithmetic of survival. He drafted the sabotage report before dawn. He was good at reports. He knew exactly which true numbers to build the lie around. What he did not know, what no model in the Hollow Ministry could have shown him, was that on the far side of the same night, on a station called Harrow's Eye, a burnt-armed boy of 20 had already found the counter to his every move, and the counter was not cleverness, and it was not force, and it could not be out-argued or outmaneuvered, because it was simply the truth held up where the innocent could see it. Andamir was about to accuse the humans of endangering the galaxy. And the humans were about to demonstrate, with a precision his own instruments would be forced to certify, that they were the only reason the galaxy still stood. He had built a lie around a true number his whole life. He was about to meet people who had built their whole lives around a true note. And a true note, unlike a true number, cannot be made to serve a lie. It can only be heard or not heard, and the galaxy was at last about to listen. The demonstration nearly killed people on the third day, and how the tenders answered that near catastrophe was, in the end, the truest proof of what they were. It happened because a dying relay does not read the plans of the people who release it. 60 Nashfall, cut loose on the emptied lane, drifted the way Cael had known it would, but it drifted harder than the models predicted, because old Voss's 3 years of hand nursing had masked just how far gone the machine truly was, and when his hand came off the shunt, the relay did not fade gently toward silence. It lurched. Its sour note bent violently off pitch, and the drag it put on its neighbors spiked, and one of those neighbors was Relay 11 Corvith, which folded a lane that was not empty at all. 11 Corvith served the Corvith Drift, a cluster of 3 inhabited moons, 60,000 people, farmers and their families who had never heard of Statute 9 Kestrel and would never need to, provided the lane over their heads stayed true. The Corvith tender was a woman named Priya Sundaram, alone on her station as most spur tenders were, and she felt 11 Corvith begin to slip a full hour before her instruments did, because she had the ear. She put out the alarm on the underhum in 3 flat words, *Corvith is going *, and the whole ring convulsed. This was the nightmare. This was the exact thing the tenders had sworn would not happen, the reason they had chosen a dead lane and evacuated it ship by ship. A cascade jumping its cage, reaching toward a living world. If 11 Corvith failed, 60,000 people would not die at once. The world would not fall out of the sky, but they would be cut off, their lane closed, their supply severed, a farming cluster that imported half its food suddenly stranded behind a wall of dark, and people would starve before a sublight ship could crawl to them across the years. And it would be the tenders' doing. The demonstration meant to prove their restraint would have killed the very kind of innocent it was designed to spare, and the Empire's lie, saboteurs, terrorists, humans who wreck relays in a fit of pique, would become, in a single stroke, the truth. Cael Marrow was on the underhum when Priya's alarm came, and afterward he could never fully describe what the next 4 hours were, because they happened in a place below language, in the machine song, in the shared body of 100 tenders working as one across 900 light-years. What he could describe was the choice, because the choice was made in words, and it was made in about 4 seconds, and it was made by Osidammer. "Retend Ashfall," she said, not a question. An order, the first true order she had given in the whole affair. "Voss, get back on the shunt, kill the demonstration, save Corvith." And there it was, the thing the Empire would never have believed of the people it called saboteurs. Given the choice between their leverage and a stranger's life, the tenders did not hesitate for even the length of a breath. Old Voss, who had wanted his relay to die where the galaxy could see it, who had earned that death across 3 years of ignored petitions, put his hand back on the shunt of the machine that had wronged him and began, against every instinct of exhausted grief, to nurse it back from the edge, to keep alive, for the sake of 60,000 farmers, the very relay whose death was the humans' only weapon. And around 11 Corvith, the ring pulled tight, Priya Sundaram and the 6 nearest tenders pouring everything they had into the throat of a slipping machine, absorbing the lurch, holding the note, refusing to let the Corvith drift feel so much as a flicker. They held it. 4 hours, and they held it, and 60,000 people on 3 farming moons went to bed that night and woke the next morning, and never knew that 100 human hands had spent a night keeping the dark from their door. 11 Corvith steadied. 60 Nashfall, retended, sank back into its long, slow dying at a pace the ring could cage. The demonstration survived barely, contained again to its single node. And Cael Marrow sat back from the underhum console with his hands shaking, and understood something that would organize the rest of his life. "We almost did it," he said. "We almost became what they called us." "No," Osei said. She was gray with exhaustion and her voice was rough as bark. "We almost had an accident. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. When the machine turned on us, we didn't reach for the leverage. We dropped it and grabbed for Corvith. That's not almost becoming them. That's the opposite of them. That's the proof." She looked at him. "You want to know why the truth is going to win? Because we just proved, when nobody was watching but us, that we'd throw away our only weapon before we'd let a farmer's child starve. We didn't do it for an audience. We did it because it's who we are, and a people who does that in the dark with no one watching." She shook her head slowly. "There's no statute in the galaxy that can abolish that. They can strike our names off the ledger. They can't strike that out of us. It's the one thing they never owned." But the near disaster at Corvith had a second edge, and it cut toward them. Because the drift spike that nearly took 11 Corvith had registered, and it had registered on imperial instruments, and Prefect Ondemir's analysts saw exactly the wrong thing in it. They saw a cascade lurch toward an inhabited cluster. They did not see the 4-hour human rescue that followed. The underhum was silent to their sensors, the ring invisible, the mercy uncounted. They saw only the danger and its shape, and the shape fit Ondemir's report as if he had drawn it himself, a relay failure reaching for a populated world. The sabotage narrative, which had been a lie waiting for evidence, suddenly had a graph to stand on. "See how they endanger the innocent," the report would say. "See how the terror spreads toward the Corvith drift. Only the fleet can protect the people now." The tenders learned of it on the 4th day, when the Hollow Ministry's dispatch went out across the ordinary channels, and a sympathetic clerk. There were always sympathetic clerks, humans and others who had worked beside tenders and knew what they were, leaked it down the spur. Cael read the sabotage report in the ready room, and for the first time since the whole thing began, he felt the ground of his plan tilt under him. He had believed the truth would be enough. He had believed that if you held a thing up plainly, people would see it. And here was Ondemir, taking the human's single most self-sacrificing hour, the night they threw away their weapon to save Corvith, and holding it up plainly as proof that they were monsters, because a graph does not carry the underhum. A graph does not show you 100 hands in the dark. A graph shows a spike reaching toward a world, and a frightened assembly reads its own fear into it, and the truth, held up plainly, is not enough after all, because plainness is not the same as being heard. "They're going to send the fleet," Baco said into the silence. "They're going to garrison us as saboteurs, take the Lattice, and when it fails, and it'll fail, they can't run it, they'll say we did it. They'll bury the whole thing under a war in our own graves." He spread his ruined hands, and this time there was no grim humor in it. "The demonstration isn't working, Osai. We showed them the truth and they turned it into the lie. We're going to lose." And the terrible arithmetic sat in the room again. The cudgel, the whole galaxy by the throat, the one weapon that could not be turned into a lie because it needed no interpreter. If the fleet came, if garrison ships folded into the spur to seize the tenders and take the machine, then the tenders would face the choice they had sworn they would never face. Submit and let the Lattice die in imperial hands, taking 100 worlds down slowly with it, or take their hands away all at once and bring it down fast and clean, and let the Empire choke on the dark it had forgotten how to cross. Baco did not name the cudgel this time. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room could feel it lying there, heavier than before, harder to refuse now that truth had failed. It was Cael who spoke, and his voice was quiet and steadier than he felt. "A graph isn't the truth," he said. "It's a picture of the truth with all the people taken out. That's the whole trick of what Ondamir does. He takes the people out, so all that's left is the number, and a number will serve any lie you build around it." He looked up. "So we don't argue with his graph. You can't win an argument against a graph. It doesn't have ears. We put the people back in. We find one, just one imperial official who will come down here and look. Not read a report, look. Hear the underhum. Watch us hold the ring. Meet Voss, meet Priya. Stand in this room and understand that the spike over Corvith was the night we threw away our only weapon to save 60,000 strangers. One witness who can't be told the people don't exist, because they'll be standing in front of them." He was already moving toward the console. "The fleet takes days to muster and fold. That's our window. Somewhere in that whole gray machine there has to be one person whose job it is to check whether the reports are true. We find them. We bring them here. And we let the truth do the one thing a graph never can. We let it have a face." Osai Dammer looked at the youngest tender on Harrow's eye for a long moment. And then, slowly, she nodded, because it was the only road left that did not end in the cudgel. "Then we'd better hope," she said, "that somewhere in the Aurelian Diadem there's still one honest auditor." And 900 light-years away, in the Conquered Court, a filing crossed a certain desk, and a pair of tired, precise, six-fold eyes narrowed at a report that explained everything a little too well. The alarm was answered by a magistrate named Telith Vaughn, and this was the third thing the Empire had not planned, though the Empire never plans for the honest. Telith Vaughn was Vemonth, one of the tall, slow, six-limbed people whose brood ships the tenders had refused to kill, and she was an auditor of the Conquered Court, which meant it was her tedious lifelong duty to reconcile what the Empire's ministries claimed against what the Empire's ministries did. She was old and precise, and had long ago stopped expecting to be thanked. When the Lattice integrity alarm reached the court, it reached her because Lattice matters had been filed under the Hollow Ministry, and the Hollow Ministry's affairs had a way lately of landing on Telith Vaughn's desk with a faint smell she could not name but had learned to trust. The alarm said that a relay on the Sairn Reach had gone into Cascade Drift. The Hollow Ministry's own report, appended, said this was a routine failure of aged equipment, of no significance, on a lane no one used, and recommended the matter be closed. It was a good report. It was calm and thorough, and it explained everything, and it was precisely because it explained everything that Telith Vaughn did not close the matter. In 40 years of auditing, she had learned that the reports which explained everything were the ones written by someone who very much wanted a thing closed. So she pulled the file, and then she pulled the files behind the file, in the patient six-handed way of her people, and she found the thing that Prefect Sarl Ondamir had spent a year and an entire act of the Assembly trying to bury. She found the petitions. 3 years of them, from the Sairn Reach alone, One old tender named Voss, filing every 11 days, in the dry technical language of a man who has stopped hoping anyone will read him, warning that Relay 60 Nashval was failing for want of a phase shunt that cost less than the wine served at a single assembly banquet. She found that the part had been requisitioned 11 times and denied 11 times. She found the budget line the part should have come from, and she followed the budget line, and it went into the hollow ministry and did not come out. And where it should have come out there was only a notation, repeated year after year, in a hand she was coming to know, reallocated ministerial discretion. Tellith Vaughn sat with her 4 lower hands folded and her 2 upper hands very still on the desk, and she understood, with the cold completeness of an auditor who has finally found the seam, that she was not looking at a broken relay. She was looking at the small, visible edge of something enormous. A relay had died on the Saarn Reach for want of a cheap part, and the part had been denied because the money that should have bought it had gone somewhere else for 11 years, and 3 days ago the Assembly had passed a statute that sealed all the petitions about it as obsolete and abolished the only people who could testify to it. That was not thrift. That was not routine. That was a man burning the house to hide what he had stolen from it. She requested an audience with the hollow ministry. She was, of course, refused. So she did the thing that made her the 4th thing the Empire had not planned for. She went where the truth was, which was down the spur to the humans the act had abolished. She reached Harrow's Eye on the 4th day in a small court cutter with no escort, and Cael Marrow was the one who met her at the dock because Osa had sent him. "You found the truth," Osa had said, "so you go tell it." He had protested that he was 20 and no one would listen to him, and Osai had said that was exactly why they'd listen, that a gray old prefect could dismiss a gray old crew lead as a disgruntled union boss, but a burnt-armed boy who could explain the machine and had no reason to lie was harder to file away. "You don't argue with them," she told him. "You just show them what's true. Truth is the only weapon we've got that they can't take with a statute." So Cael stood at the dock and watched the vehement's auditor unfold herself from the cutter, and he was frightened in a way he hadn't been even when the news came, because the news had been a disaster and this was a chance, and a chance can be lost. But he took her into the ready room and he showed her. He showed her the tending logs. He showed her the machine song, patching the underhum's carrier through the ready room speakers so that, for the first time in her long life, a vehement's auditor heard the sound the humans heard, 10,000 relays singing across the galaxy, and one voice, out on the Saarn Reach, gone sour and sliding into silence. He showed her the ring of tenders holding the cascade, the discipline of it, the surgical care with which a wronged people had let exactly 1 relay die and no more. He showed her the traffic logs, the 2 days of quiet rerouting, the ship-by-ship evacuation of a lane the tenders were about to let close, and he made her understand what it meant. "We could have let it spread," he said. "We could have taken the whole Saarn Reach. We could take the whole spur if we down tools. We're not going to. Not because we owe the Empire anything. We don't. They made sure of that 4 days ago. Because there's a vehement's broodship folding through lane 9 in," he checked, 6 hours, 500,000 larvae, and we'd sooner cut off our hands than let it die to make a point. He looked at her. This old auditor of the people his own people had just refused to harm. "We're the ones holding your children up, magistrate. We've been holding them up for 200 years. And 4 days ago the Assembly voted 11 to 12 that we don't exist." Tellith Vaughn was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had the careful weight of a person choosing to believe a thing that would cost her everything to have believed. "Show me the man who did it," she said. "Show me where the money went." And Cael Marrow, who had never in his life been further from the spur than the training station at Den, spread the hollow ministry's stolen budget across the comms table. For the tenders had it, of course they had it. They had been reading their own suppressed petitions on the underhum for years, and tracing the denied parts back to the empty budget lines. They simply had never had anyone with the standing to be heard. He laid it all out for the one imperial official in the galaxy who had come to look. 11 years of reallocation, one ministry, one house, one gray and elegant man doing sums no one else could see. Ondamir, Telith Vaughn said, and there was no surprise in it, only the closing of a circuit. He wrote the act to seal his own theft. She rose on all 6 limbs, and something in the great slow architecture of her had changed. The conquered court cannot unpass a statute of the assembly, but it can compel an inquiry into the origins of one. If I can show that Statute 9 Kestrel was drafted to conceal a crime, the statute is poisoned at the root, and every family that voted for it will run from it like a burning ship, because there is nothing the great families fear more than being caught holding a thief's coat. Her upper hands folded. But I need the demonstration to continue. I need the assembly to feel the cost while I make them look at the cause. A closed inquiry moves in years. A galaxy that has begun to feel the lattice fail moves in days. It's already moving, Cael said quietly. 60 Nashfall closed an hour ago. The lane's gone dark, that's the first one. He hesitated. We can let them feel more, carefully, but magistrate, every relay we let go is a risk, even the dead ones. The cascade wants to spread. We can hold the ring around 1, around 2, but the more we let die to make them listen, the closer we come to being the thing we refuse to be. So I need you to make them listen fast. Because if you can't, he didn't finish it. He didn't have to. The alternative sat in the room with them, the cudgel Baco had named and the whole crew had put down, waiting to be picked back up if truth failed. It nearly did fail, because the Empire's first instinct when it feels a cost is not to find the cause, but to punish the messenger. When Lane Cairn went dark, the Hollow Ministry's report to the Assembly did not mention theft or petitions or a workforce abolished. It said sabotage. It said that the newly self-sustaining humans, ungrateful for 2 centuries of imperial patronage, had turned to terrorism, that they had wrecked a relay in a fit of pique and would wreck more, and that the answer was not to reconsider the act but to enforce it with the fleet. Prefect Ondamir stood in the vault hall for once and spoke. He was very good. He was grave and reluctant, and he wore the face of a man doing painful sums, and he told the assembly that the human question, having been settled by statute, was now a security matter, and that he requested emergency authority to garrison the spur and take the Lattice into direct fleet administration. It was a masterstroke, and it very nearly worked, because it gave the great families exactly what they wanted, a way to feel wronged instead of guilty. For an afternoon the assembly roared for the fleet. For an afternoon Sarl Ondamir stood at the edge of total victory, the humans branded as terrorists, the Lattice seized, the petitions buried under a war, his theft sealed forever beneath the wreckage of the people who could have named it. And then 2 things happened on the same day, and the day was the 5th day, and the 5th day was the day the Empire began to beg. The first was that a Vemonth broodship folded clean through Lane 9 over Cass Reticulum, 500,000 larvae, carried safe across the killing dark, and its brood mother who had heard, on the underhum frequency the humans had quietly shared with her, exactly whose hands had held the lane open while the assembly called those hands terrorist, broke every protocol of her stately people and addressed the conquered court directly. She was not a politician. She was a mother with 500,000 children, and she told the court, in the flat, unanswerable voice of someone who has just watched her entire future fold safely through a door that abolished ghosts were holding open, that if the humans were terrorists, then she owed her children's lives to terrorists, and she would like to know what that made the assembly that had branded them so. The second was that Telith Vaughn filed her audit. The audit of Telith Vaughn was 11,000 pages long, and it fit, in the end, into a single sentence that she read aloud to the conquered court, while the whole galaxy listened on lanes the humans held open for her. Statute 9 Kestrel, she said, was written by the man who broke the Lattice to keep the people who fixed it from telling you he had. Then she laid out the 11 years. She laid out the budget that went into the Hollow Ministry and did not come out. She laid out the 11 denied requisitions for a phase shunt cheaper than a banquet's wine, and the 3 years of an old man's petitions, and the relay that had died for want of the part, and the act that had sealed all of it as obsolete on the very day it was passed. She laid out the ledger and the theft it hid, and the war Cael Marrow had just requested to bury the theft under. And she laid it beside the thing the humans had done in answer, the single sacrificed relay on the emptied lane, the ring held around it, the brood ship folded safe. And she let the court and the assembly and the 100 watching species see the two things side by side. The Empire's answer to being carried had been a statute of erasure and a demand for a war. The humans' answer to being erased had been to evacuate a lane before they let it close, so that not one life would pay for the Empire's crime. You did not abolish an underclass, Telith Vaughn told the assembly. You abolished your own foundation, and you did it to protect a thief. And the only reason your ships still fold and your children still cross the dark is that the people you erased are, at this moment, choosing hour by hour, relay by relay, not to let you fall. They hold the ring around the wound you made. They have every right and every reason to take their hands away. They have not. That is who you branded terrorist this afternoon. The vault hall did not roar. The vault hall went very, very quiet. Because now the great families did the sum themselves, each in the privacy of a skull that had laughed behind a sleeve 5 days before, and the sum was terrible. If it was true, if the Lattice was dying, if it had been dying for years, if it was human hands and only human hands holding the cascade to a single node out on the Saran Reach, then the assembly had not saved a line in a ledger. It had put its hand around its own throat and voted 11 to 12 to squeeze. Every family that had voted for Statute 9 Kestrel to please Ondamir and thrift the treasury now saw, in one cold instant, that they had trusted their entire civilization's survival to the goodwill of a people they had just spat upon. And they saw, worse, that the goodwill was real, that the humans were still holding the ring, still folding the brood ships, still choosing mercy the assembly had done nothing to earn. And there is no fear quite like the fear of a cruel man who realizes he is alive only because his victim is kinder than he is. Cael Marrow tried to speak. He rose, gray and elegant, and he began the sentence he had prepared, the one about sabotage and security and the human question, and for the first time in his long career the vault hall would not let him finish it. A vehement delegate rose across from him, kin to the brood mother, 6 limbs trembling with a rage his stately people almost never showed, and asked him into the recorder, into the ears of the galaxy, one question. The phase shunt for Relay 60 Nashfall. It was denied 11 times. Where did the money go, Prefect? And Cael Marrow, who had drafted an entire act of the assembly to make sure no one would ever ask him that question, discovered that he had no answer that was not the truth, and the truth was a rope. The reckoning, when it came, was not fire. The humans had refused fire. It was something the Empire found far more unendurable, because it could not be fought and could not be forgiven and could not be blamed on anyone but itself. It was the sound of the machine going quiet, one relay at a time, exactly where the guilty could hear it and the innocent could not. For while Telith Vaughn read her audit, the tenders had been doing a thing of terrible precision. They did not down tools. They did not break the lattice. They did something the assembly understood far better, because it was the assembly's own language turned back on it. They redistributed. They took Ondamir's word, self-sustaining, and they applied it with surgical exactness to the people who had voted for it. Coronal Prime, the capital world, the seat of the families who had passed the act, was served by a cluster of relays that folded its luxuries in from across the empire. The pale Vemonth wine, the tithe grain, the rare earth trade that made the great houses great. And one by one, with the same care they had used to empty the Saran Reach lane, the tenders let those relays drift. Not to closing, never quite to closing, just enough. Just enough that the wine did not arrive, that the trade folds ran late, that the families of Coronal Prime woke each morning to a capital that worked a little worse than the day before. A capital sliding gently backward through its own comforts. A capital learning by the hour what self-sustaining felt like when the people who sustained you had taken you at your word. And every world that had voted against the act, every colony, every creche world, every innocent species who had not laughed behind a sleeve, kept its lanes clean and true and humming, and the tenders held those rings without a flicker, and the contrast was the whole message. The empire looked out across itself and saw its map divided into two kinds of world, the ones the humans still carried, and the ones the humans had let feel their own weight. And there was no mistaking which was which, and there was no mistaking who had drawn the line, and there was no mistaking that it could have been so much worse and had been, by deliberate human choice, held to exactly this. That was the demonstration Cael Marrow had wanted, not the breaking of the machine. Any thug could break a machine. The revealing of it. Turn out the lights only in the rooms where the guilty sit, and let them watch the rest of the house stay warm. On the 6th day, the price of everything on Coronal Prime had tripled, and a brood ship over the capital had to be waved off its fold, because the local relay had drifted too far to fold it safe, and had to take the long, slow way around. And the families who had voted 11 to 12 watched a vehement mother thank the human tenders on the open court channel for refusing to let her fold into a fold that would have killed her. Refusing on the grounds that the relay serving Coronal Prime could no longer be trusted, and the shame of it, the specific, itemized shame of being told that your own capital's lanes were now the dangerous ones, did what no threat could have done. The great families broke first, as the cruel always do when cruelty stops paying. They did not break out of conscience. They broke out of arithmetic. One by one the houses that had voted for the act went to the conquered court and renounced it, and each of them, renouncing, pointed at the man who had drafted it, until Sarl Ondamir stood alone in the center of a vault hall that had laughed with him a week before, and every hand in it was pointing, and the amber recorder swallowed every word. He was arrested on the 7th day. The charge was not the theft, though the theft was proven. The charge was not even the act, though the act was already dead. The charge, in the dry, precise language of Teleth Vaughn's court, was that he had endangered the whole of the Empire's fold network for private gain, and then attempted to conceal the danger by abolishing the only people capable of naming it, a crime the Aurelian legal code had no name for, because in the whole history of the Diadem, no one had ever imagined a man cruel enough and clever enough to try it. They had to write a new statute to charge him. They called it, with an irony no one missed, the Ondamir Statute, and its first clause defined the crime of endangering the common foundation, and it would outlast every other thing the man had done. But the Ondamir Statute was not the reckoning either. It was only the paperwork of it. The reckoning was the thing that happened when the Assembly, its prefect arrested and its act renounced, and its capital's lanes drifting and a vehement mother's thanks still ringing in its ears, finally understood that none of it, not the arrest, not the renunciation, not the new statute, would restart a single relay. The machine did not answer to the Assembly. It never had. It answered to a workforce the Assembly had abolished and could not unabolish by decree, because you cannot order a ghost back to work, and the humans had made themselves ghosts on the Empire's own word. There was only one thing left for the Empire to do, the one thing the great families of the Aurelian Diadem had never in 200 proud years done, and on the 7th day they did it. They begged. They did not send the fleet, they sent an envoy. The Assembly's first instinct, even then, had been to send the fleet. Old reflexes die last, and there were still voices in the vault hall who argued that the humans could be compelled, that a garrison on Harrow's Eye and a gun to the crew lead's head would restart the relays fast enough. It was Teleth Vaughn who killed that idea, and she killed it with a single flat sentence that the great families would repeat to their grandchildren. You cannot hold a knife to the hand of someone who is choosing not to let you fall, she said, and expect the hand to keep holding you. Threaten the tenders, and the tenders take their hands away, and this time they will be right too. You have exactly one asset left in this negotiation, and it is that these people are kinder than you deserve. Do not spend it on a gun." So they sent an envoy, and because the Empire had at last learned something, they did not send a prefect or a family lord. They sent Telith Vaughn herself, the auditor, the one human. She was not human. She was the one person of any species the humans trusted, and they gave her the full authority of the assembly, and they sent her down the spur to Harrow's Eye to beg. Cael Marrow met her at the dock again. It had been 6 days since the first time, and he felt as if it had been years. He was still 20. He still had the burn scars. But something had happened to him in 6 days that happens to some people only once in a life, and to most people never. He had proposed a thing, and the thing had been true, and the truth had moved a galaxy. And now he understood, in a way he had not understood before, that being young was not the same as being small. Osai Dammer was waiting in the ready room, and old Voss had come in from the Sairn Reach on a supply hop to be there, and Baco with his ruined hand, and the apprentice girl who did not cry any more, and 40 tenders who had held a ring for 7 days and were tired in a way that sleep would not fix. And Telith Vaughn stood before them, the envoy of the empire that had abolished them, carrying that empire's surrender, and she did the thing she had come to do. She read the assembly's petition, not a decree, a petition. The Aurelian Diadem in the 200th year of the conquered formally requested that the human tenders of the Lattice consent to resume their tending. That was the word, consent. It had never appeared in an imperial document addressed to humans before. The petition acknowledged, clause by clause in the same cold registry shorthand that had abolished them a week ago, now turned entirely around, that the Lattice had been maintained by human labor for 2 centuries, that the maintenance had been systematically defunded, that Statute 9 Kestrel had been drafted in bad faith to conceal that defunding, that the statute was hereby annulled in full, its every clause struck, its every consequence reversed, and that the assembly acknowledged, formally and for the record that would outlast all of them, that it owed its continued existence to the restraint of the people it had wronged. Then Telith Vaughn set the document down, and stopped being an envoy for a moment, and spoke as herself. "They will restore everything you had," she said. "The pay, the protection, the charter standing, all of it and more, because they are frightened, and frightened people are generous. You could ask for the spur. You could ask for seats in the assembly, for the hollow ministry itself, for reparation to the last coin. They would give it to you because they have understood finally that they cannot make you do anything, and the only power left in the galaxy that can is the power you already hold in your own hands." She paused. "So I have not come to tell you what to accept. I have come to ask you what you want. It has been a long time, I think, since anyone in the Empire asked you that." The ready room was silent, 40 tired faces. And it was Osai Dammer who turned at the end to the youngest of them because she had learned in the last 7 days to trust where his mind went. "Cael," she said, "you started this in this room. You finish it." Cael Marrow stood, and he was aware of the machine song under his boots, the 10,000 relays singing true, the 2 that drifted over coronal prime that he could bring back to pitch with a word, and he thought about what he wanted, and he found that it was not the spur and not the assembly and not the ministry and not the last coin. "We don't want to rule you," he said. "That's the thing you can't seem to understand even now. We never wanted to rule anything. We wanted the part." A few of the tenders laughed, low and rough, because it was true and it was absurd and it was the whole of it. 3 years old Voss filed for a phase shunt that cost less than your wine and you wouldn't send it, and a man robbed the whole galaxy while you called it thrift. We don't want to be your masters. We want to be seen. We want the money to reach the machine. We want a tender's petition to be read by someone who can send the part. We want it written down, somewhere it can't be sealed as obsolete, that the thing holding your civilization together is people, people with names, with mothers whose grip is worn into the metal, with hands that burn when they're careless, and that people can be abandoned, and that when you abandon the people, the machine dies. no matter how much you told yourself it ran on its own. He looked at the vehement auditor, who had come to look when no one else would. Here's what we want. Annul the act, you've done that. Fix the lattice, really fix it, fund it, build the redundancy, train the tenders you starved us of, so no one ever again holds the whole galaxy up on stubbornness and no pay. Put the tending under the court under her. He nodded at Teleth Vaughn. Not under a ministry that can be bought, but under an auditor who reads the petitions. And write the truth into the charter in the first clause, where the families have to see it every time they open the book, that the empire is carried, and that the carried are not property, and that the day you forget it is the day the lanes go dark. Do that and we'll bring your capital back to pitch by nightfall, and no broodship will ever have to take the long way around again. He sat down. That's all. That was always all. Teleth Vaughn looked at him for a long moment with her two upper eyes, and something moved in the great slow architecture of her that, in a human, would have been the beginning of tears. 200 years, she said quietly, and they never once asked because they were sure they already knew the answer. They were sure you would demand the empire, and you have asked for a phase shunt and an honest ledger and one true sentence in a book. She folded all 6 hands, the deepest courtesy her people had. I will carry it to them exactly as you have said it, and they will grant it because it is so much less than they deserve to be asked, and because they know it. They granted it. Of course they granted it. A galaxy that has begged does not haggle. Statute 9 Kestrel was struck from the Amber Recorder, the first law in the history of the Diadem to be annulled in the same session it took effect. The Lattice was rebuilt, truly rebuilt over the years that followed, funded to the last coin, its redundancy restored, its tenders trained in the thousands, and paid at last what people are worth who hold up the sky. The tending passed to the conquered court, under Teleth Vaughn, who read every petition until the day she died and sent the part every time. And in the first clause of the recharted conquered, above the tithes and the treaties and the proud old lineages of the great families, they wrote the sentence Cael Marrow had asked for, in letters no statute could seal as obsolete. The empire is carried. The carried are not property. Remember the hands. Sarl Ondamir was convicted under the statute that bore his name, and was sentenced to the one punishment the humans requested for him, which was not death. They had refused death for the Vemonth larvae, and they refused it for him too, and that refusal was its own kind of verdict on the man. He was sent to the Cairn Reach, to the dead end of a spur, and made to tend the relays he had starved, to climb into the throats of the machines he had never once touched, to feel the true note wander and coax it back, to spend the rest of his elegant gray life doing the work he had abolished a people to avoid paying for. Old Voss trained him. It was, everyone agreed, a mercy, and it was, everyone also agreed, exactly the right one. And Cael Marrow went back to Cluster 9. He had been offered things in the weeks after, a seat, a title, a place on the court beside Teleth Vaughn, the gratitude of 100 worlds made solid. He turned them down, all but one. He kept, at the auditor's insistence, a single standing right. Any tender anywhere on the Lattice could send a petition directly to him, and he would see it read. He was 20 years old and he had moved a galaxy, and he wanted, more than anything the Empire could offer, to put his hands back in the machine where his mother's grip was worn into the metal, and to feel the 10,000 relays singing true, and to know that when the note went sour out on some lonely lane, a person would answer, and the part would come. On the night the recharted conquered was ratified, he was 300 meters inside Cluster 9 with a phase probe in his teeth, coaxing a drift error back into tune, and the Lattice spoke to him through the soles of his boots and the bones of his jaw. The vast layered cord, whole again, funded again, seen at last, and out on the Cairn Reach a gray man who had once ruled a ministry knelt in the throat of a relay and learned, too late and forever, the weight of the hands he had thrown away. The Empire had approved the abandoned human act to save a line in a ledger, certain the machine would run itself. Days later it had knelt in its own vault hall and begged the abandoned to come back, And the abandoned had come, not because they were commanded, and not because they were kind to the guilty, but because 500,000 larvae were folding through the dark that night, and a tender does not let a child die to punish a prefect. That was the whole of the reckoning and the whole of the awe, that the galaxy had learned in 7 days, the thing its cruelest law had been written to forget. You can strike a people from your ledger. You cannot strike their hands from the machine, and the hands, when you finally look at them, turn out to have been holding you up the whole time, waiting with more patience than you will ever deserve for you to ask their names.